Let's go now to our panel. With me, Ben Oquist from the Australia Institute and David Gazzard, Director of DPG Advisory Solutions. Let's start with the story that Andrew Clennell and I reported earlier about the front page. Well, I mean, the Times reported it first of all, but it's the front page in London on the Times of Mike Pezzullo's comments. It's attracting some international attention now. David, should the government be concerned about this intervention from the head of the Home Affairs Department?
I don't really see, the choice of words was probably colourful from a secretary, and normally you would expect those words to come from an academic or someone in the defence sector. It was a private speech to staff, and I think in a lot of ways it's a little bit unremarkable, to be honest, when you've got flights over Taiwan, you have the whole region that is basically, you've got the Quad conducting exercises. So I don't think that would come as a surprise. Probably what's been a surprise is that it was said and it was reported, it got out. But I do think for our security agencies, and let's face it, Mike runs one, to have them thinking about risks to Australia's security and sovereignty is completely unremarkable.
The broader message, Ben Oquist, was quite, it was nuanced, it was well thought out, and he's known to be a very thorough and respected public servant, certainly respected by the Prime Minister and Minister for Defence. However, that one remark about the drumbeats of war, that's the one that's caused, I guess, people to raise their eyebrows, Ben.
Indeed, and yeah, he is widely respected, and it's a free country and people can say what they like. I don't think it's unremarkable, though. I don't think the Times has put it on their front page for no reason. I don't think the Prime Minister has been peppered with questions about it for no reason. It does strike you as a little bit odd. I was taken with something Phil Curry said this morning, that the talk of war is made too lightly, and I don't think that phrase was wise. I don't think it's helped calm the situation regionally. And of course, secretaries make speeches to staff all the time. But that kind of language is going to get reported, and I don't think it was wise. It does open up the question, and accepting that your point that the comments were nuanced, I thought Bill Shorten's interview with you earlier was interesting, saying that he found the Minister Dutton's nuances much more nuanced than the secretaries, and that he thought that was an unusual situation to be saying that of Dutton. It does seem strange, though, that he would make such a speech without the Prime Minister's imprimatur, especially as is being reported that he's angling for the position of Defence Secretary. I thought it all seemed a bit weird, actually, despite what you say about the significance of the speech, for him to make a speech at this time as a Department Secretary. He had an opinion piece in the paper as well. It's a free country, of course, but I don't think it helped the Prime Minister today, or has helped the situation regionally. I don't think being on the front page of the Times is something that the Prime Minister nor Pezzullo would have wanted.
Yeah, David Gazzard, if you send it to 8,000 staff, he would know that there's every chance it gets released, especially using some of that language. And the scenario now, the Prime Minister likes him and respects him, there's no doubt about that, and so does Peter Dutton and many other people within government. But there's a difficulty now, if they did want to move him to defence, for example, which has been widely speculated, Ben referencing that there. There's a problem there if they do that, because it stokes the whole issue again with China.
I would separate, the conflation of his aspirations, be they may as Ben says, his proximity to the Prime Minister. I would look at this from the context of China's involvement now in Hong Kong. We all know what's happened there. The build-up and attention on security that is being played out globally at the moment, and contextualise that against the secretary of a department briefing his staff that we have to be as prepared as possible. I just can't. I mean, I see the words newsworthy and so on. I agree with that, but this is actually what you want your security agencies to be doing, to be focused on for the protection of our country.
Yeah, but I guess the question, Ben Oquist, is at a later point, at a time when the government, obviously being realistic about the situation with China, also probably wants to take a bit of heat out of it, it might not necessarily work so well in terms of the Secretary Pizzullo then moving to defence.
Of course, you have to be prepared for all manner of security situations, and the government and department secretaries are right to be doing it. But diplomacy is important. We have diplomacy for a reason. We manage expectations, we manage language, and in particular from department secretaries, and as you point out, department secretaries who are angling to be Defence Department Secretary, words matter. Of course, actions matter too, but it's incumbent upon all of us to avoid war. And of course, talking about war can increase the chance of war. So you'll be very careful in using that language. And I think the terminology is used too loosely. And I think on reflection, Pizzullo would think those words were unwise.
Now, let's look at the story Andrew Clennell reported earlier, this behind-the-scenes discussion about an aged care levy knocked on the head by the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. Is this the way that, I mean, you've worked with Prime Ministers, with Treasurers, this sort of thing, it's put up by the Prime Minister, but the Treasurer and the Treasury Secretary says, look, that's not going to fly?
I think that's a part and parcel of ERC or Cabinet. I do think what this gives us a window on is how serious the government is taking the issue of funding aged care into the future. They've had the recommendations of the Royal Commission. There is going to be a large cost to doing that into the future, and governments then have to grapple about the way that it funds it or involves people paying for their own aged care or the private sector for that matter. So there have been a lot of discussions around aged care. They are taking the issue of aged care incredibly seriously. It will form a big part of the budget. How it's going to be paid for, and at what stage any discussion occurred in Cabinet. These things are debated back and forth. I wouldn't take too much out of one part of a discussion. And again, it is very normal for Prime Minister to suggest ideas and for Treasurers to have other views about that, without even knowing if Andrew's story is correct. So there would be an ongoing debate. There's always a tension about the way that funds are divvied up. Again, the only thing I would take out of this is that the government is very, very focused on the issue of providing quality aged care.
With this report from Andrew Clennell today, Ben Oquist, it's a sign that there's been obviously a disagreement, certainly the Treasurer rejecting the idea of a levy. But as David Gazzard rightly points out, this is expensive. If you read the Royal Commission, it's hundreds of pages long, but the fundamental point was there's not enough money in that sector. Not enough funding.
I haven't read the whole Royal Commission. Yeah, I haven't read the whole Royal Commission report, but I've certainly read the bits about funding and how to finance the aged care reforms that are being proposed. Now, if we're going to take aged care reform seriously, we're going to take funding seriously, we should take the Royal Commission's recommendations seriously. And they have recommended an aged care levy. One Royal Commissioner, a flat kind of 1% Medicare-style levy, and another Royal Commissioner suggested a review that looks at a much more progressive Medicare levy. Good on the Prime Minister for proposing a levy. A shame that it's been shot down. This is a once-in-a-generation political opportunity. It's always hard to raise taxes. This is an opportunity to do so. Australia is a low-taxing country, the 9th lowest in the OECD. If we had the same levels of taxation as the average OECD, that'd be $109 billion. We need to reform aged care. A financing mechanism would have secured the funding into the long term. Yes, there can be an immediate short-term injection from increasing the deficit, but in the long term, a secure revenue base that can be provided by an aged care levy, reduction in tax concessions elsewhere is a good idea. So I hope the Prime Minister persists in pursuing a levy or some kind of revenue measure to ensure that aged care funding is put not just into this budget, but is secured for the future.
David, finally, the catastrophe in India, we're seeing the government send support, as most nations are, most comparable nations sending support, but the flights, direct flights from India have been paused until the 15th of May, and it will be reviewed then. Obviously, this has not gone down well within the Indian Australian community, with many, 9,000, stuck there.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it's welcome to the world of COVID, right? Like, this is just part and parcel of where we're going. And again, we're up against the constraints of federation in a way, because if we were to allow flights and COVID were to re-end the country, it would cause serious economic harm here. Far better to be helping India, I think, manage the COVID problem it has, and for us to continue down the track to build herd immunity through vaccination here so that we can open up the borders as soon as possible. But I would say, you know, the government has got one eye onto wanting to do as much as it can to help, whereas it is also focused on vaccinating Australians, but making sure that we're not causing national economic harm by allowing a situation to eventuate where borders internally would close again.
Ben, only 20 seconds left, but your thoughts on that dire situation?
I think it's a shocking decision that we've banned flights from India. It was aided and abetted by the Premier of Western Australia, arcing up about people going to weddings. These are Australians. They should be allowed to be returned home. We need a better quarantine system that would enable it, whether it's hotel quarantine or a beefed up Alice Springs. It's a bad decision by the Prime Minister, but to be fair to him, it was aided and abetted by the Western Australian Premier. The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.